Thank you all very, very much for that welcome. And Rosa, I can't even begin to thank you for your words today, but also for, I was going to stay away from the 42 years, to hide a little bit behind that number. But I made a lot of political decisions, as those of us in public life do all the time. I don't know if I ever made a better one than the day I asked Rosa DeLauro, after a 3-hour conversation, if she'd managed my first race for the United States Senate. And so I thank you, Rosa, for countless things over the years. But I come from a large family, and if we had one more member to add to that family, the name would be Rosa DeLauro. So thank you, dear friends. That doesn't mean to everything. And it's great to be back on the campus here. And let me briefly, if I may, thank so many people who made this day possible, going back a long time. As some of you know, it was almost 30 years ago that a former president of this institution, John Castine, made a phone call to me and asked if I would be willing to think about placing my father's papers from Nuremberg and elsewhere here at the university. That's where this journey began that many years ago. And over the years, one president after another, boards of trustees have been incredibly supportive of those efforts over the year. And I must begin, of course, with the present president, President Andy Aguinobi. Done a great job under difficult circumstances. Dan Toscano, tremendous what you've done as well, along with the board. So grateful to all of them for their help in making this happen. We have a great governor in Connecticut, Ned Lamont. We've been through a tough time, as the country has. Ned Lamont deserves great credit for all he's done for the country. So thank you, Governor, very, very much for all your help on this as well. I want to also remiss, if I'm not going to get down all of them because that would take the next 20 minutes, but I want to thank my family who are here, but particularly my wife Jackie and my daughter Christina who are here today as well. And I'll mention my niece Helena Folks, who is the chairing of our advisory board, of which we have any number of members here today as well who served on that. And I'm very grateful to them, obviously, over the years for their tremendous support as well, for what they've contributed along the way. I've had a wonderful board helping us out over the last year or so. I mentioned the governor, his health, and others. But Alan Lozowski and Richard Friedman are two great friends who have been a tremendous help. I'm deeply grateful to them for their work, for their help, putting this together. And of course, what an honor it's been to have Rabbi Lozowski and his lovely wife, Ruth, invoke the invocation here today for all of us. I wanted this to happen for many reasons. Rabbi, you're an inspiration in so many ways. You and your lovely wife were survivors of that Holocaust, which was the genesis of my father's coming alive, if you will, at the Nuremberg trials. And so it would have been not quite the same event had you not been here to start this ceremony off, because so much of what you and the other survivors have done over the years have made the issue of human rights come directly home to all of us. Thank you for your contributions to our state on countless occasions, and thank you for reminding all of us to never ever forget. So thank you, my dear friend Rabbi, for being here. In any journey in life, you meet wonderful people, and there are an awful lot of them gathered here as I look around who are gathered here today. But one of the people that I knew about, I'd heard his name, but didn't get to actually spend time with him until we decided to have lunch with each other about 1.5 years ago. And so Gary Gladstein and Phyllis, thank you both. Everything you've done for UConn already, a UConn grad, giving back to this university, the great Human Rights Institute, which is of course something that all of us are so deeply proud of, would never have happened without you. And so thank you immensely, my friend, for your loyalty to this university, your generosity to this university, and your commitment to human rights. It means a great deal. Thank you very much for all that as well. You know, I've always said in politics, the people that you mention at an event like this never remember that you've mentioned them. The people that you forget never forget that you've left them out as well. So it's a very dangerous process to go through. But I know gathered here with us today, I've met, in fact, saw them coming through the door, are my former colleagues and members of our Connecticut delegation in Congress. And I see Dick Blumenthal over the side. I saw Chris Murphy coming in. I saw Johanna Hayes, John Larson, of course you've heard from Rosa, Jim Himes as well. And right in the congressional district of Joe Courtney. I think I got them all. If I left someone out, tell me. And I thank you all for being here, being a part of this day, and our legislative leaders in the General Assembly and the members, rank and file members are here as part of that as well. And I know there are a lot of you here in this room. There have been some 200 or 300 people that I call part of my family in a way over the last, or during the 36 years that I served in public office representing the state, first as a congressman and then as a senator, as Rosa mentioned. And I've been blessed by having remarkable people who are part of those efforts over all those long years. They call themselves the Dodd Squad, coming along. Creative name, I might add. I don't know where they got that title from. But I'm grateful to them so much for everything they did to make our work successful. And there are no words I can ever use to thank the people of this state for giving both my father and I the honor to represent Connecticut in the halls of Congress. Together it was 52 years, his service and mine, to represent the state in that building. And so I'm very grateful to my staff. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at this particular moment. I remember I hired a guy out of a friendly ice cream shop almost more than 40 years ago to come and be a part of the staff. And if just a couple of days ago, after a long illness, Eddie Mann, my chief of staff of the Senate office, passed away. And so I want Eddie to know, even though he's not here today, how much he's responsible for everything else that happened over the years to make us successful on behalf of the people of this state. So to my staff, I thank all of them as well, the Dodd Squad. Dan Wiener, I should have mentioned at the top. Glenn Matoma, who's been the director of the Dodd Impact Program. Glenn, thank you for everything you've done as well. Kathy Leibel at the director of HRI, the Human Rights Institute. Again, it's a great team to put together to make this happen. Richard Wilson, who is the Gladstone, holds the Gladstein chair, is also tremendously important. And Richard, thank you for all that you do as well in this. And lastly, events like this don't happen miraculously. You have people who dedicate themselves working with the university, the governor's office, the board of trustees. But I want Lee Reynolds, who's done a tremendous job for over a year putting it all together. And Erin Bingle is well working with us. Erin and I have only known her a short time, but she is phenomenal, the job she's done as well. So Erin, thank you for everything you've done to pull this all together. Well, let me just, in my sort of brief remarks here, because this is a great honor to have the President of the United States on our campus here in our state. 75 years ago, on October 15th, 1946, that's tomorrow, 21 defendants at the Nuremberg trial were waiting in their cells 75 years ago today, on the eve of receiving the sentences that the four Allied nations, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, had concluded only 2 weeks earlier on October 1st. Winston Churchill had argued for summary executions of all the defendants at Nuremberg. Joseph Stalin suggested a show trial for a day or two or a week or two, and then execute all of the defendants at Nuremberg. 10 of the defendants on October 16th, 1946, senior Nazi leaders, would be executed the next day on October 16th. 8 of the defendants were given a wide range of prison sentences, and 3 of the defendants were completely acquitted on that day. Who would have ever imagined, if you will, that a trial conducted by 4 nations with highly diverse judicial systems could adhere to the principles of the rule of law as they prosecuted some of the worst, most vile, horrific criminals in recorded history? 1 year earlier, in November of 1945, the chief prosecutor for the United States, Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, eloquently foretold why the trials at Nuremberg were so critical. His words, uttered 3/4 of a century ago, predicted the conduct of the trial and, importantly, the relevancy of Nuremberg in our 21st century world. My father revered Justice Jackson, almost a father and son sort of relationship, and he often quoted a sentence from Justice Jackson's opening remarks at the trial. Let me share them with you. That 4 great nations, he said, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance by voluntarily submitting their captive enemies to the judgment of the rule of law, is one of the most significant tributes that power ever paid to reason. One sentence which captured the essence of Nuremberg, the rule of law. This wasn't about colonies and acquiring property It was about restoring the rule of law that had been so violated. Everything the Nazis did during their reign was in their minds justified, ironically, because of the Nuremberg laws that gave them permission in their minds to do what they did. Prior to his death in April of 1945, Franklin Roosevelt, as many of you know, appointed Justice Jackson as the United States prosecutor at Nuremberg. And President Truman shortly thereafter, of course, confirmed that choice. What FDR, Harry Truman, and Justice Jackson understood, and what my father, as a 38-year-old Justice Department prosecutor, would come to understand, and what President Joe Biden has believed and championed for his entire public life, is the peace and security we all seek at home and abroad is rooted in the triumph of democratic values and the rule of law. The confirmation of my father's conviction that the Nuremberg trials were of meaningful importance was expressed in a letter to my mother in the early summer of 1946, almost a year later after the trials began. The letter captures why Nuremberg resonates even today, in my view, with all who value the rule of law. And further, that letter explains the huge impact that Nuremberg had on my father and his deep commitment to human rights and the rule of law throughout his public life. Let me quote from that letter to my mother in June of 1946. "Someday," he wrote, "the Nuremberg trials will be recognized as a great landmark in the struggle of mankind for peace. I will never do anything as worthwhile again. Nothing will ever really be as important. Someday the children, I hope, will point to it and be proud and inspired by it. Perhaps they will be at the bar themselves, and perhaps they will invoke the precedents and call upon the law that we make here at Nuremberg." Today we gather on the campus of a great American university and at the entrance to its Center for Human Rights. May I say with thanks and confidence to those of you gathered here today who made this day possible, including, of course, my friend, the President of the United States. In response to my father's hope that he uttered 75 years ago, here at this center, at this university, in this our country, we will invoke the precedents and call upon the law that was made in Nuremberg 75 years ago. I am very grateful to my dear, dear friend, our president, for coming to Connecticut, for coming to our flagship university, and for coming to the Dodd Center for Human Rights. My friendship with Joe Biden goes back years as Senate colleagues, and it strongly continues to this day. A friendship that is both personally and substantively grounded. When my sister passed away some years ago in Rhode Island, who came to Rhode Island and walked unannounced into that funeral home, was then the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. When my older brother was diagnosed with cancer, who did I call first for advice and counsel on what to do? My friend, Joe Biden. And we were both campaigning for the presidential nomination, which you've all certainly forgotten, in 2007, participating in those endless debates. Which candidate flew to and from the debate with me? My friend, Joe Biden. Now allow me to quickly add, we did so because of our deep friendship for each other, but we were also both broke, I might add, as well. In today's highly polarized political world, such joint ventures, regrettably, would be unlikely. So I'm grateful to my friend for being with us today. But there are strong substantive reasons as well for our friendship. In all our years together, I know of no other Senate colleague with whom I served who cared more or fought harder for the fundamental human rights of people at home and around the globe. Before his public life, President Biden was personally engaged with the Civil Rights Movement in Wilmington, Delaware. He authored the Violence Against Women Act, and he was a leading voice against apartheid in South Africa. And his historic confrontation with the Balkans during the Balkans conflict, with the leading Serbian human rights abuser, Slobodan Milosevic, was yet another example of his fearless advocacy of human rights. The President was a consistent, strong voice on human rights conditions in Northern Ireland as well, and I never had a more loyal colleague in my efforts to stem the tide of human rights abuses in Central America. As Senator, as Vice President, and today as our President, Joe Biden is not merely an advocate of human rights and the rule of law, he is consistently and actively engaged as an outspoken world leader in this cause. Today, hate crimes and hate speech, as we all know, are on the rise. Supremacist groups are proliferating at home and around the globe as well. And the number of autocratic regimes seems to grow on a regular basis. Mr. President, your presence here today on this our university campus, at this Center for Human Rights, is not merely a gesture of friendship, as much as I appreciate our friendship. It is also a reflection of who you are, of what you believe, and what you want for our country. Your courageous decisions, your clear priorities, in my view, and your deep, long-held convictions to build America back better after these hard and difficult years is exactly the leadership that our country so desperately needs. My friends gathered here today on this campus, would you please join me in welcoming and thanking our President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Joe Biden's husband. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. It is truly, it's not hyperbole to suggest. It's a great honor to me, a genuine honor. And at this great public university, celebrating the life and legacy of not one, but two proud sons of Connecticut. Senator Thomas Dodd, and my good friend, and we truly are really good, close friends, Senator Chris Dodd. Chris and I have known each other for a long time, but if you'll excuse the point of personal privilege, as we used to say in the Senate, I saw up close how he fought for human rights and human dignity in the Senate. Do you know my measure, Madam Ambassador, Ambassador Kennedy, you know what my measure is? People who tell me they care about people and then disrespect a waitress or a waiter. People who tell me they care about how, in fact, people are entitled to be treated with dignity and walk by someone at a shoe-side stand and suddenly say hello. People who do not do just simply decent things for ordinary people. That's the real measure. I've never seen Chris, figuratively or speaking, walk by anybody. I've never seen him, nor his wife, nor his two brilliant, beautiful daughters. I remember the passion and eloquence that you brought to the floor, Chris, whether you were fighting for American families or serving as the Senate leading voice on engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean. And your brother, the ambassador, did a pretty damn good job as well. I think that the work this center is doing to bring human rights to the forefront of public understanding is making a real and immediate impact for all young people today. You know, I think it's going to rate high among your family's many great and lasting contributions to the country, Chris. And I know this is truly a family commitment for the Dodds. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I think I really mean it. It's an honor to be able to be here. Of course, I owe Chris. I remember where, as he pointed out, we were both running for president back in 2007 with almost no cash in either of our campaigns. You let me hop a ride with you in a twin-engine prop plane, true story, from our Senate vote in D.C. to a Democratic debate in New Hampshire. We were on our way to the debate one other time, but the whole way up, we just laughed and told stories before we were debating one another. And then the next day, to get back to the Senate to vote, we had to flag down a young, remember this? To flag down a young senator named Barack Obama. to get to even open the airport. God's truth. Remember that, Chris? Here, he'd just been there 2 years. He was on my Foreign Relations Committee. I was chairman. I said, can you get the airport open for us? I kid Barack. I couldn't understand why he so soundly defeated me in that primary. And then I realized when he'd be introduced by the voice of God. I get introduced by Johnny Scanafrana. So it took a while for me to figure all this out. Luckily, Chris, I got to travel on a much nicer plane these days. Yours to travel in anytime you would like. I want to thank a few more proud Connecticut leaders who've been spending time with me today. Governor Lamont, you're one of the finest governors in the country. I'm not being solicitous. Seated only by your wife. And Senator Blumenthal, I mentioned earlier today, I apologize for repeating this, but my son, Beau Biden, who's the one that should be standing here talking to you. My son, Beau Biden, was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. One of the people he went to and sought advice from, for real, was then Attorney General Blumenthal. They became friends, and my son was a great admirer, and I think the senator knows that. And Senator Murphy, if I have to summon in the foxhole with me, I want Murphy with me, man. No, I'm serious. This guy knows as much about foreign policy as anybody does, and his failure to remain silent has meant a great deal to me because he's spoken up on so much. And Representative Courtney, I thank you for your help and your support. And Rosa DeLauro. Rosa, I don't owe as much as Chris does to Rosa, but I owe a hell of a lot to her. My son was married, and he was in the second year of law school, and he transferred to Yale Law School. And Rosa heard that I was coming up with him, and the apartment he rented was less than ideal. And the whole thing had to be painted. My brother Jimmy fixes everything. My brother Jimmy's with us, and we went down and bought about 28 gallons of paint. I don't know, but for real, it was hot as hell as well. And I'm up on a 8-foot ladder painting the crown molding and sweating like the proverbial you know what. And here, the door, I said, come in. And the then, is it Alderman or Councilman at the time? Alderman DeLauro walked in, her mom. And she said, where's Biden? I said, I'm here. She said, no, stop fooling with me, son. Where's Biden? I said, no, I'm Biden, I'm Biden. And she came, I said, I just want to come over and introduce myself and tell your son will be taken care of. And in walks the chief of police. I thought, holy God, what did I do? She said, you have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to worry about. Talk about constituent service. Rosa, you come by it, honestly. And Rosa, we've all, and I'm not being solicitous again, using that word twice now, we've all learned a great deal from you. I thank you for your long-standing dedication to relating to the well-being of children and families, and for championing and expanding the child tax credit, which is a gigantic middle-class tax cut for working families. So it finally got passed in the American Rescue Plan, which we were able to get done immediately upon being elected. And Rosa will not tell you, but she's the first person I called to ask for her help as to how I should do this. And that put money in the pockets of families all across this country, even as we speak. It's how we're going to cut child poverty in this country. And we've already cut it nearly in half. And none of us should lose sight of what it meant to American families when we think about our mission to defend human rights and dignity at home and around the world. 26 years ago today, another United States Senator, United States President, who I just spoke to, Chris, literally an hour and a half ago, Bill Clinton, he sends his best, by the way, visited this university to dedicate the Thomas J. Dodd Research Center, a library and archives of papers that amount to an incredible first-person, first draft of history. And let me say, they're all thinking about President Clinton today as he's sending him his good wishes of speedy recovery. He's always been a comeback kid. He's getting out of the hospital. Everything's going well. But he wanted to send his best. As a young lawyer, Tom Dodd had already built a record of fighting hatred by prosecuting the KKK in the South. But when in 1945 he left behind his beloved Grace and his 5 young children, a young Christopher just 14 months old at the time, to travel to the bombed out cities of Europe, to document the shocking atrocities still fresh in their horror, to question and cross-examine some of history's most notorious villains. That's not hyperbole. Some of history's most notorious villains. And to expose beyond question the depravity and the crimes against humanity that the Nazi regime committed. Tom Dodd dedicated his intellect and his moral passion and his resolute sense of right and wrong to making the Nuremberg War Crimes Trial a testament to justice. And that's what it was, a testament to justice. Nothing like it ever happened before. And all the while, he was writing letters to his Grace, lamenting their separation, but recognizing the momentous weight of history that rested on his shoulders. And Chris, I came up with the same sentence from your book. Someday, he wrote, will be recognized as a great landmark in the struggle of mankind for peace. Never before has such a record been written, and men will read it for 1,000 years in amazement and wonder how it ever happened. When President Clinton spoke at this first dedication, he ended on a poignant reminder. He said, and I quote, "The road to tyranny, we must never forget, begins with the destruction of truth." The road to tyranny begins with the destruction of truth. In my view, that was the lesson at the heart of the Nuremberg trials. Finding truth, documenting it, so it could never be denied. In court, Tom Dodd built a case fact by fact, using the Nazis' own meticulous records of crimes and shocking human evidence to pin down Nazi leaders who tried to deny their complicity and feign ignorance. And even more important, it denied the entire German policy the ability to feign ignorance. To deal with the past, you must face the truth. Whether it's Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz, or other camps, millions of Jews rounded up, along with members of other minority groups, thrown into camps, abused, used as forced labor, medical experimentation. 6 million Jews murdered, including so many who met their ultimate fate in the gas chamber. He made sure no one could deny their own eyes and what they saw. He preserved the truth, ugly and as traumatic as it was, for all of history, so that the horrors of the Holocaust could never be diminished or denied. An evil that we still have to guard against to this day has to be watched. Chris, as you heard me say many times before, because you got to meet my dad. My dad was a well-read, high school educated fellow whose greatest regret was he never went to college. But he cared deeply about human dignity. Our dinner table, my dad was what many would call a righteous Christian. He happened to be a Catholic. He was a righteous Christian. And growing up, my dad would come home for dinner before we went back to close the business he managed. And the dinner table was the place we sat down to have conversation and incidentally eat. I'm serious. My dad used to talk about, as a student of the Holocaust, what a tragedy it was that we didn't bomb the railroad tracks toward the end of the war. How wrong it was that we turned away the St. Louis, a ship full of Jewish refugees from Europe. He believed passionately the only way we can make real the promise of never again was to keep reminding ourselves of what had happened and how so many people otherwise thought themselves decent people rationalized that it really wasn't happening. We didn't know what was going on. Because they weren't turning on the gas valve, they had no responsibility. That's why, we'll again excuse the point of personal privilege, when each of my children, and now my grandchildren, turn the age of 15, the first thing I've done, my word is abiding, is put them on an aircraft and fly to Dachau, one at a time, at age 15. Work sets you free as you go through the entrance. But that's not what I wanted them to see. I wanted them to see the lovely homes that were right up against the fence line with their beautiful roofs. People living in there rationalized that it's not me. I'm not doing this. And I don't know really what's going on in there. I wanted them to see the ability of the human mind to rationalize cannot be underestimated. I would say parenthetically, the reason why Germany has been able to turn it around unlike other countries is because they faced it head on, acknowledged. So let me say it again. Nuremberg was unlike anything that ever came before. It was not about vengeance. It was about accountability. For only acknowledging the truth can we prevent the repetition of atrocities which are happening now in other parts of the world. It elevated our conception, as Chris said, of the rule of law. It set a marker for the future of justice, uplifted the importance of human rights in international affairs. We see it in the Nuremberg tribunals, the blueprint we see in those tribunals, the blueprint for future United Nations tribunals that would help deliver justice after atrocities committed in Rwanda, in former Yugoslavia. We see it in the values championed at Nuremberg, in the antecedents of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the foundation of a rules-based international order, built out of the wreckage of two wars, world wars, not just to prevent us from destroying ourselves, but to actively build a better future. We see in the passion of a young prosecutor the commitment to prioritizing the human impacts of policies. The commitment carried through in his son's career in public service by all the students of this institute who have been inspired by the example. We need you. We need you badly. And as we look around the world today, we see human rights and democratic principles increasingly under assault. We feel the same charge of history upon our own shoulders to act. We have fewer democracies in the world today than we did 15 years ago. Fewer, not more, fewer. Cannot be sustained. That's why from day one of my administration, I've taken concrete steps to put human rights back at the center of our foreign policy and reassert our moral leadership on the global stage. To lead, as Chris has so often heard me say, with the power of our example, not the example of our power. Chris and I served in the Foreign Relations Committee. We excoriated abuses elsewhere in the world and called for action overseas. But human rights, in some ways, stood apart from the domestic struggle of civil rights and civil liberties and equal justice here at home. Today, we know that our efforts to defend human rights around the world are stronger because we recognize our own historic challenges as part of that same fight. Leading by example means taking action at home to renew and defend our own democracy, to advance equity and promote justice, to defend the sacred right to vote in free, fair, and secure elections. Leading by example means not pretending that our history has been perfect, but demonstrating how strong nations speak honestly about the past and uphold the truth and strive to improve. We make the best case for gender equality, racial justice and equity, religious freedom, the rights of the LGBTQ plus peoples, and other marginalized communities around the world by practicing what we preach. First 10 minutes out of his office, I ended the Muslim ban, advancing racial equity through the federal government, overturning the ban on transgender individuals serving openly in the United States military, establishing the White House Gender Policy Council, demonstrating that our commitment to human rights begins at home, is among the most powerful and persuasive tools in our foreign policy kit. And as we defend human rights beyond our shores, we're more effective when we work together, allies and partners in our shared values. America as a nation is unique in all history, not because we're inherently better, because the basis upon which we're organized. Virtually every other nation is organized based on ethnicity, religion, geography, color. We're unique in all the world. We're based on one guiding principle. We hold these truths to be self-evident, but all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have never lived up to it. We've never, until very recently, walked away from it. ARC has always bent closer and closer to justice and inclusion. The moment we stop, the moment we rest, is the moment that our influence diminishes. So we're re-engaging multilaterally and rallying the world to advance universal human rights and fundamental freedoms, and prove that democracies can still deliver in an age of fast-moving, cross-cutting challenges. We have rejoined the UN Human Rights Council, which we walked away from. The United States of America last night didn't want to be part. I mean, just yesterday, we won an election to a new 3-year term that begins in January in that committee. We had to fight to get back on it, because the world wondered, do we mean it still? The United States of America, do we mean it? In December, the United States will host a virtual summit, the Summit of Democracies, to bring together world leaders to make concrete commitments to defend democratic values, push back against advancing authoritarianism. Not war, but important words. We can't return to a world where might is right and strong nations abuse weak or oppress individual rights with impunity. Nuremberg forced us to look closely at the evil of humankind and what we're capable of perpetrating. To see mass atrocities, crimes against humanity, do not happen by accident. They don't happen by accident. The result of choices. Choices made by individual human beings and world leaders. And sadly, when we look around the world today, we cannot say that the specter of atrocity is behind us. We see today the patterns, the choices playing out around the world, even as we speak. The oppression and use of forced labor of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Treatment of the Rohingya by the military junta in Burma. The rampant abuses, including the use of starvation and sexual violence to terrorize civilian populations in northern Ethiopia. Whenever we hear that kind of poisonous hatred, where we ever see our fellow human beings being dehumanized, doesn't mean we go to war, but we must speak out. Silence, as my dad would remind me, silence is complicity. Silence is complicity. That's what Nuremberg said. Your silence is complicity. I've raised these issues personally with leaders around the world, our friends and adversaries alike. And I made it clear that no U.S. president should stand by when human rights are under attack and maintain their legitimacy. Those who we are, that's who we are as Americans. It's part of our DNA. We've fought, we've marched, we've sacrificed to ensure the rights are not reserved to just the wealthy or the powerful. They're God-given inheritance of every person on this planet by virtue of our shared humanity. As I said to a Supreme Court justice who I disagreed with in the hearing, we have a different form. You think I have my rights because the Constitution granted to me. I possess my rights because I was born. And I gave up some of my rights in the Constitution. That's the radical idea at the core of the founding of our nation. As I said, that all men and women are created equal. We really are endowed by a creator with certain inalienable rights. And those rights don't flow from the power of the government. These rights exist for every individual, period. Period. It's the job of government to protect them, to uphold them equally for all people. We've never, as I said, fully lived up to that animating American ideal, but we've never turned our backs on it. In all the years since our founding, that idea has been our nation's steady North Star, drawing us back on course. The constant struggle to live up to our highest domestic and democratic principles, to self-correct, has made us a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. It's also made us strong, resilient, innovative, dynamic. As I said, I'll repeat, I apologize, America is the only nation founded on an idea, the single most powerful idea in human history. It sparked our revolution, it helped ignite the wave of change around the world that successive generations have built on, expanding our understanding and extending protections to ever wider circle. We must never forget just how fragile the principle of universal human rights still is, how easily bruised, often sacrificed in human battles for power and personal enrichment. In an age of increasing misinformation and disinformation, we must not grow complacent in our defense of the democratic values that have been a firm foundation for an era of peace and prosperity unprecedented in human history. Attacks on truth are still the harbinger of tyranny. Nothing about our democracy is assured, as I'm sure you're all become to realize tonight. Nothing about our freedom is guaranteed. We have to work for it. In those letters from Tom Dodd to his dear wife Grace, reflecting his service at Nuremberg, he wrote, "Sometimes a man knows his duty so clearly, so surely, he cannot hesitate, and he dare not refuse it." Tom Dodd lived a life with a clarity of purpose. He brought it to his service as a U.S. Senator, leading the floor fights with the Kennedys on civil rights legislation in the 60s, advocating for gun safety in a state that was a major gun manufacturer, legislation that was ahead of its time, fighting always for human rights and democracy against the forces of oppression and injustice. He passed that passion on to his children and to his son Chris. Chris carried forward his father's mantle in the United States Senate. He used it to fight for all American children and families, passing the first Child Care Act we've seen in this country since World War II, passing the Family and Medical Leave Act. Chris rallied against policies that militarized our relationships with Latin America and argued, instead, recognize and invest in the people in our hemisphere. He spoke out when he saw the legacy of justice that his father had fought for in Nuremberg being wrapped in the excesses of a war on terror. And he helped to create this center, growing it over the years from an archival repository for the truth into a leading center for the study and promotion of human rights at home and abroad, into a widely respected academic institution, training the next generation of human rights defenders and passing the torch to those of you who will carry the fight on into the future for the truth. So as we rededicate the Dodd Center for Human Rights to honor the legacies of both father and son, let's also dedicate it to the future generations, to the students here in the audience today who discover and defend human rights as the passion and purpose of our life. So let us be dedicated to expanding our shared understanding that we can never fully realize the freedom we wish for ourselves without also helping ensure that liberty and justice for everyone. And let's dedicate to the unending fight to bring our own nation, our own world, closer to a future in which every human being is free to pursue the highest dreams and unleash their full potential. And for you students that are here, undergraduates at this great institution, there's no reason why you will not be doing what I'm doing as President of the United States, standing here, speaking to audiences now. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I was taught, came from very modest means, no Horatio Alger story, but very modest means, that you can be anything you set your mind to if you work at it. So many of you in this audience, especially in the second tier there, are the people that my grandchildren are going to be looking to. There's not a single reason why, we can't do this. Not a single reason. As I've told every world leader that I've gotten to know, and I've met many, many of them, it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. God bless you all, and may God protect you.